Good afternoon, parents. Thank you so much for coming in today for our little presentation. If you want to just get yourself a cup of coffee and get settled, we'll get right in. Okay, so elephant in the room, we're obviously having a look at NAPLAN tonight. Now, a lot of you have expressed concern about how your children are going to be approaching the persuasive writing section of the text. Now, when we have a look at NAPLAN, the NAPLAN test itself is based on the Australian curriculum, which is a nationwide curriculum, not set state by state. The content within this test we have been working on within class. It's not something that's brand new and unfamiliar to your children. And our content has already been covered again within class. This test is just a way to see how we are tracking with our understanding. Okay, let's have a look here at the Australian curriculum. So you can see in my figure here that the Australian curriculum has 3 separate sections. It has your traditional learning areas, your maths, your English, your science, things like that. It's got some what we call general capabilities, your ICT, your ethics, things like that are going to help your kids throughout their educational career, as well as after school when they start entering the workforce and such like that. Also, we've got our cross-curriculum priorities here. These are ways that we're going to ensure that our curriculum stays relevant and engaging for our students. Okay, obviously, if we're going to be looking at persuasive writing, we're obviously going to be focusing on English. So our English curriculum is divided into sections. They're called strands and substrands or threads. Now, the strands here are your main subjects of your learning areas. Your substrands and threads are what needs to be taught. So you've got your main strands of language, literacy and literature. If you have a look at my little figure here, you can see how our strand literature flows in here to our substrand of responding to literature, and how that flows into our content descriptors or the specifics of what needs to be taught within the curriculum. Okay, so we're going to start onto our persuasive writing example. We're going to be using this text here, The Captain's Chronicle. This is a persuasive text, and this is what students are going to be required to read and answer and evaluate. Okay, let's go here into question 1. Now, this particular question, we require students to use their knowledge of text types to identify our text as persuasive. Okay, they're going to need to consider language and purpose of the text and structure, things like that, and use that knowledge in order to separate it from narratives and informational reports to identify it as a persuasive text. Okay, how this is taught within the curriculum, let's have a look here. We've got our strand here and our substrand. Then we're going to have a look here at years 3, 4, and 5. So every year we're going to be looking at the same sort of content, but as you can see, it's getting more in depth every year. We've got our basic identification. Next year in year 4, we're having a look at features of the text. And then in year 5, we're having a look at language and things like that. So every year, our understanding of the persuasive texts and imaginatives and informative texts, they're all getting more and more in depth. Okay, let's have a look at question 6 next. So this question here, we require students to evaluate the text for meaning. We don't want them to focus on literal facts. We don't want them to say they are literal backbones. We want them to recognize that as a metaphor, and we want to relate it back to what the text describes as the responsibilities in order to get the appropriate answer. Again, let's have a look at how that's associated to the curriculum. We've got our strand of literature and our substrand of examining literature. You can see here how every year, again, like the last one we looked at, our understanding is getting deeper and deeper as we move along within the curriculum. Let's have a look again as our last question. Question 7. So here we're going to be evaluating the text, and we're going to be looking for information which helps students infer which answer is more correct. We're going to also have to make sure that they're not just reading a little bit of the question, because if they miss that one little word not, they're going to have a completely different question, which is going to obviously end up with a completely different answer, and that's not what we're going for. Okay, again, let's have a look at how this is taught within the curriculum. Just like before, we've got looking at our strand, which in this case is literacy, our substrand of interpreting, analysing, and evaluating. Year 3, we're starting to develop our understanding of comprehension strategies. Year 4, we're expanding on that. We're integrating a little bit more. And then year 5, we've got even more in-depth understanding of comprehension strategies, and we're actually able to link ideas from different sources. So again, getting more and more in depth as we go on within our education and the curriculum. Okay, so now we're going to have a look at our assessment strategies. Obviously, within the class, we are going to be assessing your children's learning. We're going to use two different types of assessment for this. We're going to formative and summative. So formative assessment, this is used within the learning itself to assess how our students are tracking their progress and identify any areas that we might need to focus on. Your summative assessment is your traditional test. They can be standardized, or it can be basically just a way that we assess what a student has learned. So it's your final result, your end there. Okay, so one of the assessment types that we're going to be using to make sure your children are able to hit these marks and understand these questions is student portfolios. Now, we're going to be looking at this as formative, though it can be summative as well. So one thing that portfolios can do is they can help demonstrate progression, as we've got a bit of a collection of work from when they first started looking at that particular text all the way up to they've got a better understanding, so we can see how they're learning. It allows us as teachers to obviously help students along the way as we're picking up these individual works, and these have been shown to improve student motivation and reflection and can have a positive effect on our learning development. There are some limitations to this. The results can be considered subjective. Obviously, they're being marked by me, so the results are going to depend on what I believe. And if the content isn't accurate, then its value isn't as high. So if they're not necessarily a very strong writer, but they have a good comprehension of the ideas, having a bit of a collection of writings isn't going to necessarily assess that understanding within the content descriptor. Okay, next we're going to have a look at a different assessment type called read and retell. Now, the benefits of this is it can be used as a tool to assess the depth of comprehension. So we're not just looking at what the dog did, we're actually asking for a bit more information. We're allowing for questions that assess the student understanding that does not rely on prior information. So if in the text there's a spider, we're going to be asking what size is a spider? We don't want a kid to say, oh, the spider's small, just because, you know, a spider is generally small. We want them to look at the text to figure out why that spider is small. And studies have shown that this particular type of assessment improves comprehension and reading confidence within the student. Okay, let's have a look here at our limitations. So this particular type of assessment, it doesn't allow for the student's ability to create text. So the student may have a fantastic understanding, but they, again, may not be very strong in writing, and vice versa. So we can't really assess that. And also students with learning difficulties may have a bit of problems here. In perhaps like if a child's not a very good reader, then they're not obviously going to get the full benefit. And again, if they're not a very good communicator, they may completely understand the text, but they're not really going to be able to communicate that to you. Okay, now let's have a look again at our elephant in the room, our NAPLAN test. So one of the benefits of this, obviously, it provides a way of assessing where students have learned and their levels of understanding. That's pretty much a given. NAPLAN actually can also be used to identify areas of curriculum that might need focus on. So we can have a look at the school as a whole, and we can see that if we're having a bit of issues with one particular area, that might need some focus. And again, we can use that as evidence to help direct funding to those areas. So we may need some additional programs, things like that, but this NAPLAN test can help identify and give us reasons for that. Again, there are some limitations to the NAPLAN. The results, they can sometimes be a little bit outdated. By the time that we get the results back, students have months have passed and students may have actually continued to develop their knowledge. Well, I would have hoped they would. And it can result in what we would call teaching to the test. Some teachers, they have a lot of pressure on them in regards to NAPLAN and their results put on them, so they can actually shrink their curriculum to what is on the NAPLAN rather than looking at the curriculum as a whole, which isn't very good. Okay, so let's all take a breath here. We're done. Thank you so much for coming in. If you've got any questions that you'd like to ask me, feel free. If not, finish your coffee, grab a cookie, and we will see you next time. Again, thank you so much for taking the time out to do this with me. Good night.